He laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was subtle. A sharp exhale through his nose as he glanced down at me in the wheelchair. But I saw it. So did everyone in the room. The boardroom lights hummed overhead while his colleagues pretended not to notice the flicker of shame that crossed my face. He was up for a promotion that day. I came to support him, despite the pain, despite the bruises on my hips and the metal brace still cooling my spine. I thought he'd be proud I was there. I thought he'd want me there. Instead, he looked at me like I was a burden he hadn't planned to bring, like my presence tainted his image. And when I tried to move my leg, just a little, just enough to straighten my posture, he chuckled. That was all. Just that. And I knew in that second, whatever love he once felt had disappeared the moment I stopped being convenient. That moment didn't shatter me. It froze me. I sat there, surrounded by polished shoes and practiced smiles, and something inside me went still. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just watched him speak, animated and magnetic, thanking his team, talking about resilience and pushing through challenges. He never mentioned me, not once. And as I stared at the man I had given everything to, my youth, my body, my trust, I realized I had been erased from the story he told the world. I wasn't the supportive wife anymore. I was a mistake he didn't know how to hide. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt. I was just awake. For the first time in months, I truly saw him. And the version of him standing on that stage, that wasn't my husband. That was a man who had been waiting for me to fall so he could climb higher. That was the man who would laugh if I never stood again. So I smiled, softly, quietly, because I knew something he didn't. My body might be broken, but my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. The accident wasn't dramatic. It didn't make headlines. I wasn't hit by a speeding car or crushed in a collapse. It was simple, quiet, like the beginning of most things that ruin you. One misstep on wet stairs, a sharp crack, a fall I don't even fully remember. When I woke up, my legs were numb, and the doctors spoke in careful tones, saying things like temporary paralysis and nerve response monitoring. I held on to every syllable that sounded like hope, and at first, so did he. He brought flowers. He held my hand. He even slept in the hospital chair for 3 nights. But something in his eyes had already shifted. I noticed it in the way he winced when I asked for help reaching the call button, in the way he started checking his phone mid-sentence. He wasn't mourning the accident. He was mourning the version of me that could walk in heels beside him. Rehab was brutal. Every inch of progress came at the cost of tears and nausea. I screamed into towels. I bit my tongue until it bled, and he, my husband, began to visit less and less. "Work's been intense," he said. "The firm's watching." I told myself it made sense. After all, he was chasing a partnership, and I didn't want to hold him back. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't part of the dream anymore. I was the detour he didn't sign up for. He stopped asking about my progress, stopped touching me, stopped seeing me at all. And one night, when I asked if he'd still love me if I never walked again, he blinked, hesitated, and said, "Let's not think like that, okay?" He didn't lie. He just avoided the truth. That was worse. So I started to think for myself. I kept my questions to myself. I kept my victories to myself, too. The first time I moved my toes again, I didn't call him. I just stared at them until I cried. Quietly, alone. And it felt better that way. Safer. Because by then, I had begun to understand. The fall hadn't broken us. It had simply stripped away the illusion. I started watching him. Not with hope. That had burned out weeks ago. I watched him with clarity. With stillness. When he'd come home late, I didn't ask questions. When he started showering at odd hours and keeping his phone face down, I didn't accuse him. I just observed. There's a strange power in silence, in no longer needing someone to prove your suspicions. You already know. You stop chasing answers and start collecting evidence, not for confrontation, but for understanding, for closure, and sometimes for later. He thought I was too broken to notice, that my struggle consumed me so much I couldn't see the shift. But I saw everything. The cologne that wasn't mine, the texts that made him smile with his back turned, the way he flinched when I asked, gently, "Did something good happen today?" I stopped existing in his eyes. That was clear the night he hosted a dinner for his colleagues at our home and introduced me as my wife. She's recovering. Just that. No name. No pride. No warmth. I sat there, spine aching in my brace, smiling as best I could while they offered those pitiful glances. You know the kind. People pretending to be kind when they're secretly relieved it's not them. And he made jokes about how he was the one who now had to do the cooking, the cleaning, the driving, about how he never thought he'd be married to a patient, and everyone laughed. I did too, because I was done bleeding in public. Because that's what women are taught, to smile through humiliation, to make others comfortable with our pain. But inside, I was done. Not hurt, not broken. Done. That night, I made a promise to myself, quietly, with no theatrics. I would walk again. Not for him, not even for me, but for the version of me who sat at that table and let a man make a joke of her body. For the woman who had swallowed years of disappointment. She deserved to rise. And when she did, it would not be loud. It would be surgical, precise, unforgettable. He stopped noticing me, so I started disappearing. Not physically. I was still there, every day, in the house we shared like strangers renting space. But emotionally, mentally, spiritually, I became smoke. I stopped asking how his day was. I stopped waiting for him to come home. I stopped caring if he did. He thought I was depressed. That made him feel superior, powerful. He walked around like a man carrying the weight of a fragile wife. It gave him something. Sympathy, attention, maybe even status. Poor man, his wife's life changed overnight. And yet he stays. He performed loyalty while withdrawing it behind closed doors. I let him have the performance. Let him tell his story. I was writing mine in silence. I started therapy again, not the kind he recommended, the one that made me talk about gratitude and acceptance. I found a woman who didn't flinch when I said, "Sometimes, I wish I'd fallen harder, so I'd have an excuse to leave him." She just nodded. That's when I knew I was finally in the right room. She helped me reconnect with my body, not to please anyone else, not even to chase recovery, but to reclaim what was mine. I learned how to sit with pain without flinching. I learned how to breathe through failure. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel things again. Tingling in my thighs, warmth in my calves. The first day I stood for 5 seconds. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at myself in the mirror, and I whispered, "Not yet, but soon." He didn't know. He never asked. He assumed I was deteriorating, and I let him. I let him live in the illusion that I was fading, that I'd never be anything more than a background character in his success story. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding myself, muscle by muscle, memory by memory. And when I needed motivation, I played that scene back, the boardroom, the laugh, the subtle hum of humiliation. It lit a fire deeper than rage, because this wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. Progress became my secret rebellion. Every morning, before sunrise, I moved. Just a little. Just enough. one hand on the dresser, one foot flat on the cold floor. I trained like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to reclaim. And with every trembling push, every collapse, every second of sweat-soaked effort, I felt myself growing. Not just stronger, sharper, quieter. I didn't tell anyone, not even my therapist. It felt sacred, like a secret too powerful to name. While he left for work early, suit pressed, ego inflated, I stayed behind, not as the broken wife, but as the architect of a comeback so silent it would echo louder than applause. He never noticed the subtle changes, how I no longer winced when moving between rooms, how my eyes followed him less, how my silence stopped sounding like sadness. He was too busy planning his big night. The firm had decided to make his promotion public at the annual gala. A speech, a spotlight, a room full of power and perception. "You should come," he said, half-heartedly, like an afterthought. "They'd feel sorry for you. Might make me look more devoted." He smirked when he said it, not realizing how much he'd just handed me. So I said yes. And he laughed, genuinely this time. "Seriously, that crowd isn't ready for wheelchairs and tragedy, just skip it." But I insisted, calmly. No drama, no fight. Just a soft, "I'll be there." He rolled his eyes, "Do what you want," and walked away. That night, I sat alone and pulled out the dress, the one I hadn't worn since before the accident. It was sleek, black, and cruelly beautiful. I held it to my body like a promise. I wasn't ready yet. Not fully. But I would be. And when I walked into that ballroom, it wouldn't be for him. It wouldn't even be to be seen. It would be the moment I became whole, not because I stood up, but because I chose to rise. The night of the gala arrived like a storm with no thunder. He left early, and of course. The firm had arranged a private car, a tailored suit, a speech coach. He was glowing, practically rehearsing his legacy in the mirror as he adjusted his tie. "It's a big night," he said casually. "Don't embarrass me, okay?" I just nodded, brushing invisible lint from my dress. The same one he hadn't seen me wear in years. He didn't notice, didn't care. He kissed my cheek out of habit and left without looking back. I waited 10 minutes, then stood. It wasn't easy. Every movement was deliberate, shaky at first, then stronger. I grabbed the clutch I had prepared, the heels I hadn't worn in 15 months. I didn't need to wear them. I wanted to. Not for him. For her. For the woman who had been left behind. I stepped outside into the quiet night, slid into the car I'd arranged without his help, and whispered the address to the driver like it was a secret. Because it was. The final chapter of a book I'd been writing in silence. The ballroom was golden, loud, full of laughter that echoed too sharply. I stood at the edge of it all, heart hammering in my ears. No cane, no chair, just me, standing, breathing, present. The lights dimmed. His name was called. Applause erupted. He walked onto the stage like he owned the air itself. The smile, the charm, the humble nod. He began to speak, thanking mentors, colleagues, his journey. But not me. Never me. I wasn't part of his story. Just a shadow he thought he'd escaped. Then, something shifted. He caught a glimpse of me near the back. For a second, he froze, mid-sentence, mic in hand. His eyes widened, and I saw it. Not joy, not relief, fear, because I wasn't supposed to be there like that. Not standing, not glowing, not silent and powerful. I tilted my head, didn't wave, didn't smile. I just stood there, steady, calm, undeniable. And for the first time in months, he stumbled. His speech cracked. His audience leaned in. The illusion trembled. He tried to recover. cleared his throat, forced a laugh, looked away from me, as if by ignoring my presence, he could erase it. As I was saying, he mumbled, fumbling with the microphone, resilience is about adapting to circumstances. His voice cracked on resilience. I almost laughed. The irony hung in the air like a perfume only I could smell. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply let him feel what I had lived through. The weight of being seen and yet dismissed. The pressure of performing while falling apart inside. He wasn't ready for that feeling. He never had to carry it before. The audience shifted. A few heads turned toward me. Curious glances, whispers. It didn't take long for them to realize who I was. His wife. The one he'd spoken about like a burden, like a distant memory. But there I was. Not broken, not fading, standing taller than he ever expected. I didn't need a spotlight. I was the spotlight. And in his hesitation, in the crack of his facade, people saw something else. The man behind the mask. The man who had built his empire on a woman he thought would never rise again. He finished his speech in a hurry. No applause this time, just awkward claps, the kind people give when they don't know what else to do. I walked away before he stepped down. That was the beauty of it. He couldn't follow me. Not really, because I was already ahead of him. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt weightless. Not because I stood, but because I finally left. Outside, the air was cooler, gentler, as if the night itself had waited for this moment. My car pulled up, and as I opened the door, I caught my reflection in the window. Not the girl from the hospital bed, not the ghost at his dinner parties, but a woman who had been underestimated, abandoned, and still chose to stand. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an audience. I had something better. Myself. Whole again. The texts started that night. At first, they were harmless. Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me? Then, by morning, they turned frantic. We need to talk. You ambushed me. What the hell was that? I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. The kind of peace that comes when you no longer need someone to understand your absence. When the door finally shuts, and you realize you're glad they're on the other side. I watched the messages pile up and placed the phone face down. My silence wasn't a game. It was a decision, a boundary, a beginning. He came home late, of course. I heard the keys fumble, the footsteps cautious. He called my name, half expecting me to appear in the shadows, waiting to be forgiven, to be explained to. But the house was quiet. I had packed already. The essentials, the things that mattered. The rest, the wedding photos, the perfume bottles, the saved anniversary cards, I left behind like dried petals from a bouquet long dead. He walked into the bedroom and froze. The closet half empty. My wheelchair in the corner, untouched. The note on the bed. You laughed when I couldn't walk, but you should have feared the day I stood. No signature, no closure, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone who made you feel invisible is nothing at all. I didn't check if he cried. I didn't care if he did. My story didn't need his remorse to have meaning. My healing wasn't a punishment. It was a resurrection. And as I rode in the cab toward my new apartment, small but bright, I stared out the window and let the city blur. A new chapter doesn't always begin with fireworks. Sometimes it begins in silence. In the simple, profound realization that survival is not the end. It's the start of something extraordinary. Freedom didn't look like I imagined. It wasn't glamorous. There were no sweeping montages or cinematic sunrises. It looked like groceries in a reusable bag. It sounded like keys jingling in a lock that only I owned. It felt like silence in the morning. A silence that wasn't heavy, but peaceful. I burned candles just because. I sat on the floor and stretched without anyone watching. I danced in the kitchen in socks. I cooked badly, laughed about it, and didn't apologize. No one was there to evaluate me. No one was keeping score. For the first time in years, I was allowed to exist without explanation. I went back to physical therapy with a fire in my chest, but not to prove anything, not to post progress, not to make a statement, just because I loved feeling stronger. Because my body, even in its fragility, had carried me through hell and back. Every muscle was a scar turned into armor. Every step was a prayer answered by action. I didn't need anyone to clap. I didn't need a finish line. I just wanted to keep moving. And so I did. For me, I started writing again. Not for an audience. For myself. Just pages of thoughts, memories, truths I had swallowed for too long. And somewhere between the ink and the aching honesty, I found her. The woman I used to be before I fell in love with someone who made me small. She wasn't naive. She was hopeful. And now, she was wiser, tougher, and finally, safe. People always ask what revenge looks like. Some picture lawsuits, public call-outs, dramatic confrontations. But mine looked like this. A woman who was once laughed at, now standing in her own home, barefoot, happy, and absolutely untouchable. That's the thing about quiet comebacks. They don't need witnesses. They just need you. He showed up on a Tuesday. No warning, no text. Just a knock at the door and a familiar shadow through the peephole. For a moment, I froze. Not out of fear, but disbelief. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but diminished. As if the image he'd built of himself had finally cracked under the weight of my absence. I opened the door. Just enough to make it clear he wasn't welcome, but not enough to seem afraid. "Hi," he said, eyes scanning my face like a stranger searching for a map. "You look good." I didn't respond. I just let the silence sit between us. He hated silence. It forced him to hear himself. "I was wrong," he said finally, like it cost him. "About everything. About us." He stepped closer. "I didn't know how to handle what happened. I didn't know how to be strong." That word, strong. I almost laughed. The man who watched me rebuild bone and will with blood in my mouth had the nerve to talk about strength now. I tilted my head, still silent, still calm. He kept going. "I thought you'd never come back, but you did. I saw you that night, and I haven't stopped thinking about it." I could have told him a lot of things, about how love doesn't vanish in tragedy. It reveals itself. About how what broke us wasn't the accident, but the cowardice that followed. About how my recovery had no space left for him. But instead, I said, "This isn't your story anymore." His face fell, slowly, like someone watching the end of a dream they thought would never end. He left without asking to come inside. And as I closed the door, gently, without drama, I felt no satisfaction. No victory, just confirmation. He wasn't the villain, he was the test. And I had passed. After he left, I made tea, chamomile, no sugar, just heat and stillness. I sat by the window, watching people pass, their lives unfolding quietly beneath street lamps. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost watching other people live. I was one of them, present, whole, real. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It wasn't a place of survival. It was home. Mine. Not decorated to impress, not staged to prove anything, just soft, honest, lived in. And I realized the loudest moments in my story had never come with noise. They had come in silences I refused to fill with shame. People ask how I forgave myself. The truth, I didn't need to, because I had never been the one who failed. I just believed, for too long, that someone else's discomfort was my responsibility. That if I shrunk enough, smiled enough, sacrificed enough, I'd be loved again. But love that demands your disappearance is not love. It's control wearing a mask. And I had taken that mask off, not from him, but from me. The woman who once begged for affection, who waited at windows, who prayed that pain would make her more worthy. She no longer existed. Not because I erased her, but because I carried her out of that fire. She is part of me. But I no longer lead with her wounds. I lead with her strength. When I walked into that ballroom, I thought I was confronting him. But really, I was meeting me again. The version of myself I had buried beneath compromise and expectation. And she didn't need a spotlight. She needed space. Now, she has it. I turned off my phone that night. Not to avoid him, but because I didn't want anything disrupting the silence. The kind of silence that holds you. Healed. Whole. Home. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with breath. Quiet. Steady. Earned. I didn't post about my recovery. I didn't write an article or film a dramatic reveal. I didn't call my mother to say, I made it. Because this wasn't a performance. This was survival turned into sovereignty. And when you've lived through what I have, when your body has betrayed you, and the person who vowed to love you laughed at your limp, the only validation that matters is your own reflection. And mine. She stands tall now. Maybe not always perfectly. Some days I still shake. Some mornings the pain reminds me where I've been. But I don't shrink from it. I honor it. Because every scar is proof that I kept going. That when I was left behind, I didn't vanish. I rebuilt. Slowly. Quietly. Fully. People think revenge is about making someone hurt like you did. But the truth is, the most devastating revenge is healing without them, thriving without their apology, living in a way that no longer requires their permission to feel joy. I don't need him to see me now. I don't need him to regret. His chapter ended. Mine is still unfolding. And every time I open the door to my new home, every time I take a step, no matter how small, I remind myself, he laughed when I couldn't walk. But I stood anyway, not just at his promotion speech, but every day since. And I will keep standing, because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest comeback of all. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the loudest impact is made in silence.